Good morning, my name is Yusuf S, and today I will be talking about racial movements in the United States. The question that I came up with was, to what extent have racial movements from the 1960s and current day impacted the socioeconomic differences in the United States? My answer to this question is that racial movements in the United States have caused great divide socially, politically, and economically among African Americans and Caucasian Americans. Racial movements first began in the United States during the 1960s. A prominent leader was Martin Luther King Jr. He advocated for peaceful protests throughout the nation to bring awareness socially and politically on the issue of segregation. Another key event in the 1960s was the Montgomery bus boycott, in which African Americans refused to ride the Montgomery bus city line, and in this event, Martin Luther King was also involved. Due to this, he got arrested and was put into Birmingham jail. From this, he wrote the famous letter from Birmingham jail. In this letter, Martin Luther King Jr. writes to express his ideas of how injustice and unfairness is a threat to justice everywhere, and how he believes African Americans are being treated very unfairly in America's system. He also connects this idea to that the great divide socially based on your race in the United States was very much present during the 1960s. Moving on to present day racial movements include the Black Lives Matter movement and protests against police brutality. The Black Lives Matter movement was a direct response to the increase in police brutality that had been going on in the United States. And the police brutality protests were also directly related to police brutality, which led to racial movements such as the Black Lives Matter movement, which impacted the social and political atmosphere of the United States. Racial movements also have many political effects. In the 1960s, most of the African American groups were supported mostly by Democratic leaders, and this has had drastic effects later on. As you can see in this graph, 88% of African Americans tend to choose Democratic politicians as their leaders. This shows that due to support in the 1960s from the Democratic Party, there is still great political affiliation with the Democratic Party coming from the African Americans. After the Civil Rights Movement of the 1960s, we have seen many social effects also take place, such as the increased amount of police brutality. Police brutality has seen a drastic increase, although because of racial movements such as police brutality, it has seen a steady decrease, or it's become more stable and is not increasing as much. Another social effect of racial movements is the rise of extremist groups. As you can see in this graph, in 1960, after the racial movements of 1960, the racial extremist group represented by this red line was significantly low, and it stayed that way until 2008, when it drastically increased. This may be due to the fact that in 2008, there was a presidential election held in which the first African American president, Barack Obama, was elected. Now, this drastic increase may be directly caused by the election of an African American president, which caused a major increase in right-wing extremist groups in the United States. Out of all these effects, the most major one that we can see today is economic effects of racial movements, such as there is a major wealth gap between African Americans and Caucasians, with Caucasians earning on average 20% more than African Americans. And poverty in African Americans has been seen to be the most out of any ethnic group, including Hispanics and Asians and other minorities in the United States. Now, the solution to this problem can be by gaining more political and social awareness about the subject through the media platform. The issue of civil injustice can be dealt with to provide a more equal and just society by expressing on major by going on major channels on TV, through social media, and through the internet, we can spread the message of racial injustice in the United States. However, there are some limitations to this solution, such as the media platform may lead to more divide among Americans and among African Americans and Caucasian Americans, and cause more disagreements, such as there may be more cause for there to be debate on a bigger platform instead of there people coming to one conclusion. Another limitation is media platforms will only create limited awareness, and they will not create the full amount of awareness needed to address the issue of racial movements in the United States. Thank you. What questions do you have?
All right, Yusuf, got 2 questions for you. First up, what information did you need before you began your research?
Before I began my research, I needed information on racial movements in the 1960s, and I needed to research more about what types of racial movements took place, such as the Montgomery bus boycott of African Americans.
And what advice would you have for other researchers who are considering this topic?
Some advice I'll have for my other people would be to put more research into current racial movements, such as the Black Lives Movement, and find more examples of current movements and current racial movements that have impacted social or the political atmosphere of America.